Thank you, Sue Ellen, for those truly spectacularly detailed introductions. I am surprised you forgot to mention that we were actually a sleeper cell sent by Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who you may have seen last week. Go Big Gretch. It is completely coincidental that we all went to the University of Michigan, but it is a little bit of a fun bond. But I am so honored to be here. You heard Sue Ellen describe parts of Joan and Ruth's careers. They have done even more than what she described, and through my 20-some-odd year career in food media, I have looked up to both of these women as heroes, and in Ruth's case, as a mentor. Ruth plucked me out of near obscurity and kickstarted my career, so thank you for that. And it is truly an honor to be here with them in conversation and also in celebration of both of their new books. Always a fact checker, or always admiring fact checkers, I should say. No slight on Sue Ellen, because you did a lot of research. The Paris novel is in fact Ruth's second novel, and in some ways her third, because she once told me that, the first novel I wrote, I had to write an entire novel with a backstory, and then I realized, well, that was garbage, so I had to throw it out before I could actually start writing the novel. So this is the second published, but the third birthed from your mind.
That's exactly right.
But for a little bit of structure, because I like structure, I'm going to tell you how this is going to go. We're going to talk with both of these icons for a period of time, and then I'm going to break off, and then we're going to talk to Joan about her book, and then talk to Ruth about her book, and then I'm going to release the Kraken. You're the Kraken. And that means you get to ask them whatever you want to ask. It is an AMA, as the kids on Reddit say. That means ask me anything. I just decided you can ask them anything. I don't know if they decided that, so maybe it'll get spicy. But I want to start with, to use a terrible food writing cliche, remembrance of things past. We live in a world now where, say, a show about restaurants and chef culture like The Bear can rack up 25 Emmy nominations in a single season, right? One of the most watched and talked about shows on TV. We live in a world where you can go into a grocery store and hear someone say, "Corner," when they go around the corner. When regular people will say "yes, chef" to one another, that's really weird. I don't know why people do that. Having been the person who said "yes, chef" all the time, I'm like, why would you choose that? That's crazy. That was like some sort of weird inculcation I'd endure. But fast food chains refer to their buns as artisanal bread. It's my friend's teenage son, who was supposed to be here this evening, but unfortunately didn't make it, grew up a picky eater, but now can describe in great detail the reverse searing method that his favorite YouTube chef uses on steak. This was not the world I was born into. This was not the world that you started your careers in. So, what drew you in the 70s, both of you, to food as a profession? And how many weird looks did you get from your friends at the time?
All right. I'm older, I might as well go. I graduated from Michigan in, I can't even remember, 65. So I remember being at Michigan and looking at these horrible farmers markets, and the food seemed awful, right? The brown rice, the yogurt. The yogurt was good, but you really couldn't find. It was like Danon's yogurt, but it was plain, and you would put sugar on it, a little bit, just a little bit on your tongue. Mm-hmm. But most of the food was pretty awful. But I had gone to France as a kid, and I spent a summer there and then my junior year abroad, and all I really wanted was good food. And I just went to pastry shops, and I went to good restaurants, I went to people's homes. And so I looked at food as food that people cooked themselves, first of all. And to me, it was like, who are you? It wasn't, I couldn't afford expensive restaurants in those days. But every person whose house I went to, it was all these recipes opened a whole world to me. And so it was food and culture from my junior year abroad, leaving Michigan, then coming back to the farmer's market.
And Ruth?
Well, growing up in New York City, going to public school, I was really, the various ethnic areas of New York. We would go to Chinatown and eat at Namwa, and go to Little Italy, and up to Yorkville, and I was fascinated by all those foods. And when I went to my friends' houses, we went to Rodney Murray's house and ate Japanese food for lunch. And I went to the oldest physical public school in New York, and we all went home for lunch. And we went to each other's homes for lunch. And so, one friend's father ran a pizza parlor. And I was really taken with how different the foodways were. And I would go to Chinatown and look at these people there and think, they're going home. There's something about going to these neighborhoods that is really important to them. And partly because my mother was, the first story in Tender at the Bone, my first memoir, is about my mother inviting people to an engagement party for my brother and putting 26 of them in the hospital with food poisoning. So I started cooking out of self-defense, really. The jacket of Tender at the Bone is me cooking at 7, and you can tell that I'm not being cute, I'm cooking. And I loved to cook. And I loved going to these stores and buying things. And my mother might have been a terrible cook, but she was also a very curious person. So one day, she didn't sleep much. So one day, in the middle of the night, she walked by Otto Manelli's butcher shop, and there was a suckling pig in the window. And she went back and bought it and said to me, "Here, you know how to cook it." But it never occurred to me that I could have a career in food, because there were 6 restaurant critics in the world, and certainly educated people didn't become chefs. So, and I didn't know that there was any other possibility. You either were a restaurant critic or you were a chef, and that was all I knew about.
Yeah.
So I go to college and I get my master's degree, and I come back to New York and have a job that I loathe. And we're living in a loft on the Lower East Side, and all our friends from Michigan, come and camp in our loft. And I cook these huge meals for people, and it was a great neighborhood then. The Lower East Side, you were surrounded by the old Jews, and Chinatown and Little Italy. And so I would make these great meals every night for my friends. And one day, one of my friends said, "You're such a good cook, you ought to write a cookbook." And, today it would be ridiculous, right? A 21-year-old marching into a publisher and saying, "I'd like to write a cookbook." But I grew up in publishing. I knew a lot of editors, and I went to my favorite editor and said, "If I want to write a cookbook, what do I do?" And she said, "Well, you write an outline and a sample chapter and show it to me, and I'll tell you what to do with it." And I did that, and a couple weeks later, she called me and she said, "We'll publish it." Nobody said, "Who's testing your recipes? Where do the recipes come?" It's nothing like that. It was
Did they even ask you how many followers on TikTok you have? That's malpractice.
And it's a very particular little cookbook. It's very much of its moment. And if you look it up on Amazon, it is selling, if you can find a copy of it, for an astonishing amount of money. But after that, people thought I was a food writer, and I started getting people calling me up and asking me to write food articles, and it wasn't ever a decision I made, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And in fact, even after I was like a working restaurant critic in San Francisco, I really thought it was what I was doing until my real life started. I was 35 when the LA Times hired me, and it hit me, oh, maybe this is my real life.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, many things are interesting that you just spoke to, but both of you mentioned, you sort of had these food epiphanies. Joan, you actually going to France, right, and sort of immersing yourself, even if only for a few weeks or whatever, for a year in the culinary culture there, and how important food is there and the taste of that food. And Ruth, by traversing New York City and going to all these different neighborhoods. But so for both of you, still that epiphany was the idea that people eat delicious food somewhere else, not so. But now you look at where we are now as a society, right? Like I just described, this foodie culture is just part of our culture. Food is a part of our pop culture. Obviously, it's a long history. We don't need to spend all the time. But I'm curious, were there particular moments in both your lives where maybe a conversation, maybe a meal, where maybe you saw something, in the pages of a magazine or a newspaper, where you were like, wow, things are really changing?
Well, for me, when I went to Israel in 1970, and I started meeting Jews from all over, and I had, for me, Jewish food was chicken soup with matzo balls and challah and all those things. And I came there, and I had a cleaning woman who was Moroccan, and she made stuffed vegetables and a wonderful tort that's in my first cookbook that was, somebody said it was better than sex. It was a coconut Cointreau tort. And I thought, wow, this is a cleaning woman, a Moroccan Jewish cleaning woman. And then, and I learned about Arab food, and I learned how important it was, especially to more ethnic people or poorer people. When I worked as press attaché to the mayor of Jerusalem, foreign press attaché, and he would take me around to all these different communities in Jerusalem, and I'd see that the world opened up to him because he was interested in their food, and that was for me this big epiphany, and that's what I've seen for the rest of my life. And I realized that not everybody's food is the same. I mean, for holiday food. I mean, you probably had matzo balls too, but it just changed for me. So.
I would say my big epiphany wasn't what happened to me, but when I knew that things in America were changing. It was 1978, and I was doing a piece for New West about all the new young farmers and fishermen, about how things were changing in the beginning of California cuisine. And Alice Waters was getting her produce from a place down near San Diego, the Chino Ranch, which is still an extraordinary place. And I called them up and said I wanted to come talk to them, and Tom Chino hung up the phone. He said, "We don't talk to the press," and hung up the phone. And I called Alice and said, "Next time you go down to Chino, will you take me with you?" And we went down to the Chino Ranch for 2 days, and they have the most beautiful produce I had ever seen in my life anywhere. I mean, more beautiful than anything I'd seen in France or Italy. It was extraordinary. And on the last day, Alice and I went out and picked strawberries to take back to Chez Panisse for the dessert that night. And it's two small airports, San Diego to Oakland. So she and I get onto this plane, and we each have a flat of strawberries in our lap. and the aroma of those berries filled the plane. And this is 1978, when the only there aren't farmers markets in 1978, and the only strawberries you can get are these, hard, tasteless, white in the center strawberries that have no aroma at all. And one by one, every single person on that airplane came over and begged for a taste. And they all said, I'd forgotten what strawberries taste like. And as I watched Alice she literally gave away dessert at Chez Panisse that night. But it hit me, we can do this here. And it will change. We are capable of growing food every bit as good as what's happening in Europe. And when people get it, they want it. And I knew from that moment that this food movement was going to be enormous.
Well, it seems to me that it even started much earlier than that, because when I was at Michigan, it was in the midst of the Vietnam War, because I was there before you were. And I noticed that people like Alice were looking at food as opposed to war. And they were so angry about the war that they went to the field. And, that's what I saw. And then later, when I went to Israel, I saw things happening and things changing in food. And, it just never was the same again. It was so important.
Yeah, sort of like the back to the land as a rejection of what they saw in
I
society.
came to the Vineyard in 1977, and it's sort of a nascent. There was Morning Glory Farm. But they weren't the farms that are sort of being rehabilitated here. And now it's amazing just to be here on the Vineyard, because you can get almost everything here. And I remember once, a few years ago, we were with Bernier from Kronig's, and there was a whole group of us at somebody's house, and we were talking about slaughtering on the island. That was the only thing that really we could get. Fish, of course, fish. We could get. I live on North Road. We used to go to the Great Bight. There'd be mussels there. No mussels anymore. Nothing growing. I mean, it's just changed tremendously. But when we were at this little meeting, we were talking about getting this slaughterhouse to come. There's a slaughterhouse in Down Island Kronig's that they used to use a long time ago. And but it seemed too hard to get it working, so they still bring stuff off the island. But the caliber of food is so much better here than it was. And I think that everybody wants that now. It's sort of a way of looking at what we don't have.
Well, certainly in Berkeley, I moved to Berkeley from New York in 1973, and the war ended, and we all had this sense of, oh, we helped end this war, and what's the next cause? I mean, there was a real sense of empowerment that, we'd been fighting this war for a long time. I mean, we didn't end the war. It was like ridiculously egotistic of us. I mean, the Vietnamese ended the war, but we had a real sense of empowerment. And when we looked around to think about, what is the next cause, food was the next cause. I mean, Berkeley, people like Alice Waters went from the free speech movement to let's have a food movement. And there was a real sense that we all were growing our own food and buying food at the co-ops. And really, I mean, I did this whole project about the vertical integration of agribusiness, and it was something that we were very conscious of. But it felt like a small movement until it suddenly started. And I think that whole notion of California cuisine, which was so important in the 70s, and then started the regional cuisines. From there, we went on to the Cajun craze, right? And it was a real sense that, oh yes, we do have an American cuisine, and it's not just hamburgers.
Yeah.
I remember that Ronald Reagan's economic summit where he had Alice, I forget what she made. She made something. Wolfgang Puck made something. It was different kind of cuisine from around the country. And Maida Heater, she was there. She made brownies. It was a way of showing American cuisine. And I remember seeing that, living in Washington at the time, and thinking, you know, it was always French cuisine at the White House. You wouldn't have American. It was like a big deal.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because we're talking right now about the food movement as sort of an evolution or as part of a countercultural movement, right? But then sort of on the other side of things, like very much in the mainstream, or maybe in the sort of literary high-end mainstream, there was a person who I think of, I've never known this person, I had a very brief conversation with her, who I think of though as being maybe more responsible for opening the eyes of mainstream America to cuisines from around the world, and therefore cuisines of immigrant communities, than any other person, and as a book editor named Judith Jones, who, Joan, was your editor. You've both worked with legendary editors, and I want to talk about both of them, but Judith Jones was both your editor, was also Edna Lewis's editor, was Madhur Jaffrey's editor, was Julia Child's editor.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, heard of her.
James Beard.
It was James Beard's editor, was
Marcella.
Marcella Hazan's editor.
Claudia
Rodin's editor. So all of these iconic books written in English.
Edna Lewis.
Yeah.
You said it.
Yeah, Edna Lewis for sure. And each of these authors were not only icons in their own right, but their sort of their seminal works were, in a lot of cases, the book in English on that cuisine, on that subject. And so this was sort of a lifetime project for her. Tell me about what it was like working with her, and also what motivated that? What to your mind fueled that desire to introduce these cuisines to mainstream America?
Well, first of all, Judith loved food, and of course she loved Julia Child, you know. But first of all, she's very tough, and she was a great editor. But one thing she said to me, she told me, don't write a blurb about a book unless you think that it's a book that's going to make a difference. And that was the prime thing that she was interested in. That, you know, if there are other books that could do something, but it really has to make a difference. And that's what all these books did. And she expected more. She's a real hard worker. And she expected more from herself than from anybody else. And I remember I had worked very hard I had come to her early on to write a book, and she wanted me to write one on American food, and I wanted to write one on Jewish food, because I felt I knew about Jerusalem. I worked for the mayor of Jerusalem. I wrote a book on the Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Jerusalem, and I came to her, and she said, no, write a book on American food. And I turned her down. And then, you know, I was young.
You turned Judith Jones
I was
down.
young. I turned her down. So then, about 10 years later, my new agent, you've got to read my book, then you'll learn all about this. But anyway, my agent, Susan and Robert Lesher, said, Judith Jones wants to speak to you. Now, maybe she forgot me. I don't know. She was doing a Knopf Cooks America, and she wanted to do something on Jewish cuisine, and she said, why don't you write a book on how Jews have affected America and how America has affected Jews, and Jewish food. And I thought, what a great idea. I had done a book on Jewish holidays, but I didn't really know about Jews in America. So, you know, so I worked very hard on it. I thought I should make it historical. And then I got this phone call for her. It was from the day after Thanksgiving. And she has this patrician voice, and she said, "Joan, I think you'd better come to New York. I don't understand what you're doing." And I thought I had finished the book. And I remember exactly where I was. I was in my study upstairs.
You come to the principal's office right now, 4 hours away.
I mean, if she wrote yes or good in her green pencil, you thought you were king of the earth. But anyway, so I went to, she said, "You've got to come to New York." I remember that. So the minute I got off the phone, I realized exactly what she was saying. That I made this instead of a cookbook, I made it historical. So it was the early period, middle, anyway. I had a computer, which I didn't have with my first book, the Flavor of Jerusalem. I had to type can you imagine typing every page? And if you couldn't use whiteout even, you had to redo the whole page if you were going to hand it in. But anyway,
That sound you heard was my soul leaving my body.
So I cut and pasted, and I just changed the whole thing around. And I thought, oh, good, she can publish it when she was going to publish it. Well, she had to do it a whole year later. But it was her sternness scared me into doing the right thing in writing for her. But she was very supportive, but she was really tough. And I think she was tough on people that she liked a lot.
Sure.
Like she thought of me maybe as a daughter, I don't know. But, I loved working with Judith. We used to go, swimming together, and she was great. And then what she would do, whenever, for Julia and everybody else, that when you were in the editing process, you would go up to her house in Vermont. And for those of you who know Carlos Montoya, we used to be his house. And you'd work, her husband had made a pool. So you'd go into this freezing cold pool in the morning, and then you'd work all day. And she would pick out recipes that she wanted to make from your book to see if they were perfect. And let me tell you, I was scared sometimes. But it was an experience. And now I have a younger editor that you know, Lexi Bloom, who went to Wesleyan. Well, you didn't go to Wesleyan. But you know her, right?
Yeah.
And she's a wonderful, I love her. But like Judith had ideas. She didn't want to have, she didn't think you needed pictures in cookbooks. Julia Child didn't have pictures. That her book sold a lot. Why did you have to have pictures? And my agent kept saying, "You've got to have photos, and you've got to have a professional photographer." And finally, when I didn't have Judith anymore, she would say, "Oh, just take pictures," because she was always afraid of making Alfred Knopf spend a lot of money. She did not, and it was after she had worked for the Knopf for 50 years. She was in France when I was there. They gave her 2 first-class tickets for France that she used for herself, and then somebody else for herself twice. And she invited me to, they said, "You should go to a 3-star restaurant." We went to the 3-star restaurant, but we had to get the prefix menu because she didn't want Knopf publisher to have to spend that money. I mean, that's the way she was. She was amazing.
She was a New Englander through and through.
She was a New Englander through and through.
So I love hearing that because I had one brief conversation with her once. Actually, when I was writing a story about Edna Lewis, I had the opportunity to interview her briefly. And as a book editor, I hold her in just extraordinary esteem. I think that kind of legacy is unparalleled. If you're interested in Judith Jones, by the way, this is, I'm not here to sell someone else's book, but a dear friend, Sarah Franklin, who was a friend of Judith's towards the end of her life, just wrote a wonderful biography of her. But I'm glad that when she made you turn Jewish Cooking in America back into a cookbook from a history, as you had written, you didn't take all the history out of it.
Yes.
And actually, there's a tidbit that you wrote when you unearthed an old ad while doing your research for that book, and you wrote, "When Procter & Gamble produced Crisco, they advertised that Jewish women had been waiting 4,000 years for this white vegetable shortening that looked like lard to make American pie crust and Southern fried chicken. Were you comfortable with assigning messianic qualities to Crisco?
I thought it was great. I contacted the archivist. I got a fellowship to go to the American Jewish Archives, and which is in Cincinnati, and I met with the people at Procter & Gamble, and other people have used that from what I put in the book. But you find a tidbit like that, it's just gold.
It's only extremely blasphemous. But okay, so your method has always been, again, deep research.
Oh yeah.
History, stepping into other people's kitchens, and therefore stepping into other people's lives, talking with them, spending time with them, cooking with them, having them share their recipe with you, and you documenting that.
Mm-hmm.
A journalist. That's what a journalist does. So, 11 cookbooks in. Now you're writing your 12th, or have written your 12th. What made you, what led you to the moment where you're like, I'm going to write about me this time. I'm going to write about the history and the stories and the recipes of my life.
Well, I'd written King Solomon's Table, which I really liked writing so much. And my editor, Lexi Bloom, came to my house, and I showed her all that I had. I have letters that you'll see in the end papers of the book. From Ruth Reichel, from Julia Child, from Jane Grigson, from MFK Fisher. I mean, I had so many letters. And I also had so many family cookbooks. I had 6 family written cookbooks from Germany, from different generations. You could see different handwriting. And actually, one summer on the vineyard, I met with Trudy Lash when she was in her 80s at her house in Menemsha. And I had one cookbook that I had gotten. A woman called my answering machine when answering machines were very new. I had been at a spa with one of my kids, and I came back and I listened to the answering machine, and the woman said, I'm getting ready to die. For some reason, I have a cookbook. This was after Jewish Cooking in America with Joan Nathan was on PBS. I think that's how she got my phone number. Anyway, she said, I have a cookbook by Truda Nathan, and Lena Nathan, which is my grandmother and my aunt. And you can imagine,
oh my God.
I got this phone call, and she sent it to me. It was carefully presented in wallpaper. They had used that to protect it. And maybe 3 or 4 generations recipes. And I don't know how she got it. I have no idea. She said her husband got it. And she was from Canada. My aunt had already died. And so I came and met with Trudy Lash, and I asked her if she would translate it, and I would bring over cookies, because she was German. And I spent the whole summer, with her translating this good book and finding, people, things that were written, so-and-so left Germany in 1860 to come to America. Different names, and different kinds of recipes. I mean, there was Sachertorte there, and a porcupine pie, and all kinds of things in German.
Was the porcupine metaphorical?
Well, it was like,
you never know.
With pine nuts to look like a porcupine.
Oh, okay, cool, okay.
Pushed in there. But anyway, now, if I don't write a cookbook, what I really would like to do is take these old cookbooks and there are a lot of old cookbooks. I bet some of the people in this room have some of these German old cookbooks, and put them together to see what working recipes there you can use. And I just, that's what I want to do. I don't know if it'll be, and it'll probably be with the Leo Baeck Institute. It won't be something that we can use every day, but I think it will tell a lot about different people. And, they all use, Sachertorte is everywhere. a charm tart, you know, the meringue tart, and you can see how they get easier, you know, different generations, or they're not used anymore. And I just think it's really interesting, and that's what I want to do. But being with True to Lash in Menemsha once a week was just a great thing.
Mm-hmm. And so was writing My Life in Recipes sort of like your own version of that larger project?
Right, well, yeah, and I also, so when I showed Lexi some of the things that I had, she said, well, why don't you do something like My Life in Recipes? I think it was My Life in Search of Recipes, that's what we thought. And again, I never knew what she really wanted. I mean, I sort of did, and I wrote it during COVID. My husband had passed away, and I used to work in bed, get up at 5 in the morning and just write. In fact, sometimes I would walk later with Chris Russell right there. And I looked backwards, and I was just looking at it the other day. I haven't read it since I sent it on. I had no idea if they would ever print it. I had no idea what kind of reception it would get, and I've been astonished because I've never written anything that's, and Lexi said, let's do a hybrid cookbook memoir. Usually there's like in some of your books where there's a recipe at the end, but let's put recipes as part of your cookbook, as part of your life. And she's smart, and she had a good idea, and it worked. And and she listened to me with the end papers. I really wanted that, and I know that would cost a lot of money.
To put the letters.
But when I wrote Jewish Cooking in America, they put the Yiddish ads in there, and the Yiddish ads, I think, sold the book. I mean, it sold. I remember my husband looked at the cover of the book. It was somebody from the Morgenthau family, and there were no yarmulkes on it. And my husband, not that he ever necessarily wore a yarmulke, but he said, "This is a Jewish cookbook. Nobody will buy it." And it sold 35,000 copies the first month. And, and so we did change the cover the second later. But
you Photoshop yarmulkes onto them.
He thought as a lawyer he knew everything. He didn't. But when it has everything, I realized something was taken out of the book. Pam Colbert was the first person I ever babysat for in my life at 12 years old in Larchmont, New York. But and I remember that early on I wanted to have ice cream to make sure that this is what your mother told me, that I asked would there be ice cream for me to eat. But anyway.
I hope they paid you more than ice cream, but that's a different story. So Ruth, let me turn to Ruth. Obviously memoir is not new to you. You've written 4 of them. Oh, you're counting for your mother? Okay, you're counting. Okay, so 5 of them. I used to joke with Ruth that no one's allowed to write more autobiographies than Frederick Douglass. And now you've bested that number by 166%, so congratulations. But fiction, relatively new to you. As we said before, this is your 2nd novel. And I thought it was actually so interesting that the title of it was simply The Paris Novel. And it's such a plain-spoken title, it's so direct. To me, I interpret it as a self-assuredness. Like you're comfortable in who you are as a writer, and you're just putting this to the world. This is the Paris novel. Am I right in that?
I think you're right. I haven't thought about it that way, but all my other books have these very poetic titles, and they all come from Yeats or Eliot. And this one, we just, as I was writing it, we just called it The Paris Novel. And when they wanted me to come up with something more fanciful, I just said, no, this is really what I want to call it. And I mean, it was interesting because and as you know, it's really the salesmen who are in charge of what the title, and sometimes the bookstores. They, if Barnes and Noble or Amazon says, we hate this jacket, they immediately go back and change it. And the salesmen were very, they did not like the title until we came up with the jacket. And once we had that cover, they suddenly went, oh yeah, we love the title.
And what happens when you've written a book is you know that there's certain things you can fight, and the title is not one you can fight.
No,
really.
Absolutely not.
It's just not worth fighting.
Yeah. But I mean,
It's amazing hearing this, because let me talk to you about the authors I work with.
Oh, that's right.
I don't win any fights.
I
Well,
think
the author really wants, but
Well,
will you come talk to some of these people for me? Like, have you heard of Gen Z?
Well, like the sales force at Knopf, I can remember, and I can't remember which book it was, but one salesman at Barnes & Noble, when Barnes & Noble was somebody you listened to, didn't like the title of my book, and they changed it for him. Crazy.
It is pretty wild.
Huh.
it's kind of classic.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of a way, because the book is such a fun plot. So I'm trying to think of ways to talk about the book without giving too many spoilers. But there is, it's basically the story of a young woman who, with a traumatizing childhood, who discovers the necessity of joy and pleasure.
Yes, yes.
And what led you to that theme?
Well, Susan Campbell, my wonderful editor,
Another legendary editor.
when I had finished Save Me the Plums, she said, I really love that chapter about the little black dress. And it's a chapter, a real story of me going into a vintage clothing store in Paris and trying on a dress that absolutely transforms me. I mean, I look in the mirror, I'm the creature I have always wanted to be. I am glamorous and sexy, and my body looks, I wanted that dress so desperately. And the sales lady says, but this is your dress, you must have it. And I said, how much is it? And it was $6,000. And it was the first dress that Yves Saint Laurent made when he was at Dior. And I didn't buy the dress. And Susan said, I really wish you would write a novel where your character buys the dress. And the minute she said it, I saw the book. And it was about, I genuinely believe that pleasure is important and that we don't pay attention to it very much. We're a Puritan country, and we don't understand the power of pleasure. And so I thought, I am going to have a character who has made her life tiny, who has been so traumatized that she's shut down and she has not allowed herself any pleasure in life. And she is going to, through this dress, understand everything about what joy can be. And I knew that I was going to get everything that I really care about. I would get, food and art and literature into this book. And Susan gave me this enormous gift where it never would have occurred to me if she hadn't said that. But the minute she said it, I knew exactly where to go. And, I am like many writers. I hate writing. I love having written. There's nothing better than that day when something great happens on the page. But I will do anything to avoid writing. And this book...
I'm sitting here right now. I got a book contract real overdue.
Exactly. And this book, when I sent it to my agent, I said, this book has got to be awful. There is no way this book is any good because I loved every minute of writing this book. And she read it like in that night, and she called me the next morning and said, you are never allowed to write anything that you don't like again. And it was, I mean, the whole experience of writing this book was kind of, for me, magical. I mean, the characters just came to me, and I would pick up my computer and go out to my studio to write and say to my family, now I'm going to Paris. And it was like going to Paris, and I spent longer than I needed to with the book because I didn't want to let these characters go. I enjoyed being with them so much.
Did that pleasure change your perspective on the act of writing?
It did. I mean, I'm actually now starting on a sequel to this book because I really want to know what happens next. And now I know that I will probably have fun with this one too.
You all get a copy of this book on the way out of here, right?
They're gonna have a real treat.
Have fun with it. You're gonna have a blast.
But can I just say something, because this audience doesn't know this about you? You are, I have met a few great editors in my life, and Frances is one of them. And I don't even know if you know this, but we worked together at Guilt Taste for a couple of years. And when they shut Guilt Taste down, many of the writers we were working with called me and said, do you think I could pay Frances to keep editing me? Because what good editors do is ask you the questions that you hadn't thought of yourself. I mean, they read your work with great thought and care, and very few editors do that, and you really do. So.
And they also have to have guts, I think, don't you think? They also have to have guts to really to be convinced of their convictions about you. You can't be mamby-pamby.
I'm a little bit of a pushover, to be honest, but I appreciate you imbuing me with the strength of a lion. Well, thank you, Ruth. Thank you for telling me that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, you can edit me anytime.
I do want to ask you, I'm going to go back to the dress for a minute. You said no to the dress, Stella says yes to the dress. And I could not help but remember, both reading and also knowing sort of all the stories of when you were a restaurant critic, excuse me, when you were a restaurant critic, how you would sort of, in an effort to not be recognized, you would make yourself up. And at some point it became almost like you were creating characters. You had specific characters who would go to different restaurants. Was there a parallel to the experience that you were writing there, to this idea of how you feel like a different person when you get dressed up? Very much, because when I was writing Garlic and Sapphires, which is about those characters I became when I was a restaurant critic, what happens is you put on, and I did these very elaborate disguises, and you put all this on, the wigs and the fake nails and the costume and everything, but inside you're still you, and you leave the apartment and I'm still Ruth. But as people start reacting to this person that you're pretending to be, you become that person in a very real way, because nobody's responding to you. I mean, my elevator man was in love with one of Brenda, my redhead, and he was always saying to me, when is your friend Brenda going to come visit you again? And Brenda was a much nicer person than I am, actually. And everybody loved Brenda.
And that was very fun for me. You know, I mean, she'd be in restaurants and she'd make friends with everybody at all the tables around her, and people would give her food. Or, you know, when I became Betty, the sad little bag lady that I followed one day, because this woman got on a bus one day and she looked so, I mean, she was carrying 3 shopping bags and she looked exhausted. And I got up and gave her my seat. And she said, "Oh, thank you, dearie. Nobody ever stands up for me. Sometimes I feel invisible." And I thought, invisible, that's exactly what I want to be, is invisible. And I followed her and I saw it was true. She didn't get seen. And it was, you know, and it's not that hard to turn yourself into a sad old lady. It was the easiest costume I ever had. But it was daunting to see that people really didn't see me, as opposed to Chloe, my fabulous blonde. And, you know, cabs would come screeching to a halt for Chloe. And it very much did inform my feeling of, you know, we are very much in control of how we present ourselves to the world, and most of us aren't aware of it. And, you know, people who complain that they always get bad service in restaurants, and you think, well, there's a reason for that, you know?
Well, it's interesting to like how you play with identity, and to be in a place where, you know, you were specific to your profession. You were, no one asked you to do that, but like that was the way you approached it. But it's so interesting to think now, you know, as you've, you know, embarked fully into a career as a novelist, oh, how much fiction sort of lived within your life.
I'm also, I have to say, I mean, I'm kind of addicted to fiction. You know, I mean, it's my drug of choice. Really, I mean, I
You were in Berkeley in the 70s.
But I think there's something extraordinary about how fiction can take you away, can, you know, make you go on outside your own body for a while and be in another place. And, you know, when you're really unhappy or in pain, fiction is a gift. And so I have always loved it. And, you know, writing fiction, it gives, I mean, this book has been different than my other books in that there is not a day that somebody doesn't thank me for writing this book and just say, I really needed that. And it's so satisfying to feel like I've done that for that thing that so many authors have done for me, I've been able to do for some other people.
Yeah, I certainly felt that while I was reading it and feeling very much like, boy, I'd rather be in this world than the one I'm currently in. But thank you both so much. I want to make sure that we do have time for all of you. So, questions for Ruth and Joan. And I believe there's a microphone going around the room, so I actually don't know the logistics of how this is supposed to work. But okay, great, terrific. So raise your hands if you have a question.
Thank you for a very intimate conversation. So I just wanted to ask a pure question of the three of you, and I hope that doesn't break the fourth wall, but is there a obscure spice that you know of that you feel should get more use, and then what use is it for?
Wow, what a question.
Pity the unseen spice.
Are there any spices that are obscure anymore? There are all these extraordinary spice companies now. So, I mean, this is not one spice that, you know, there are now these people who are making extraordinary spice blends. And somebody gave me this blend that the guy at La Boite, Lior
Lev Circus.
that he is making for the restaurant Ci Siamo. And it's a mix of fennel powder and chili pepper, and a little bit of salt. And I find myself using it on everything.
And I use nigella, which is black caraway seed. I love using that. In fact, I even am growing nigella flowers this year just because I want the little seeds. That's one thing. But, you have to get really fresh herbs and the spices. And the other one I like is sumac. And I use that more and more because it has, what? Oh, yeah, exactly.
I don't know if I have an obscure spice. I guess what I would say, though, is to find a spice producer that is making spices from very particular varieties or very particular places and working with farmers and specific farmers. It's like, oh my God, I've never tasted cinnamon before, and oh my God, I've never tasted turmeric before. And there are two producers in particular I think of right now. One is called Diaspora Company, and the other is called Burlap and Barrel.
Oh, yeah.
And their spices are fantastic. Really, really, really just super fragrant, super powerful. And sometimes, it's not just the intensity, but this specific type of black pepper, for instance, has different flavors than other black peppers you've had or whatever. It's two really, really wonderful producers.
I would. Burlap and Barrel makes a za'atar that Rima Zil is doing for them that is so much better than any other za'atar that I've had.
Does it have a lot of sumac in it? Because sometimes they don't. They don't have it.
It has. I don't know if it has a lot. It's wonderful.
Sure.
Do you mind standing? This question is for Ruth. In your opinion, how does French cuisine relate to the joie de vivre of the cultural ideal?
I think the answer to that is you can find it in French schools where children are fed really good food in French schools. And I worked in summers at French camps, and the food was great. And I think that what happens in France, and it's starting to change a little, which is part of why I set my book in '83. But everybody in France at that point really understood how important food is. And this is a country that has spent most of our time pretending that food isn't important. And what happened, the American government decided at the end of World War II that we were going to fight communism by having the cheapest, most abundant food in the world. And the result of that has been just to destroy the environment, our health. 6 in 10 Americans have a food-related disease. They're healthier because they eat better food. And it is hard to have joie de vivre when you're feeling sick most of the time. And I think, we have done ourselves a huge disservice by not understanding how important food is in our lives, how important it is to our communities.
And also meals.
Yes.
They sit down, they have a meal, they talk. It's really important.
Thank you. No. This question's for Ruth. Do you see your novel as a movie? Is it?
It has
possible?
been optioned for a
That's
movie.
what I want.
It will probably never get made because for the last 20 years, all my books have been optioned for TV shows. They have never been made. So they've had famous actresses attached to them. Didn't matter.
It's quite disheartening to hear that you hate writing, and to hear that all writers hate writing. How do you do it? I mean, how do you get up in the morning and motivate yourself day after day? You know, I'd slash my wrists if I had to do something every day that I hated.
Well, the thing is that when it goes well, it's so wonderful that you keep aiming for that.
You can do a lot extra while you're not writing. You can clean your house. You can do.
Hi, thanks for coming. I think you've just been so fantastic. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you. I have a question for all of you. Do you have a go-to food, and if so, what is it?
Me? Bread and butter.
Good.
Good bread and good sweet butter. There's nothing better. And the other thing I absolutely cannot live without is lemons.
I like those too, but lately, really good dates. When I'm hungry, a really good date from California. I like Batista brick dates from Southern California. I mean, I like lots, and also dates with peanut butter.
Hot dogs.
Really?
I mean, it's another question. Depends on the mood. But hot dogs, anytime.
I have never seen you eat a hot dog.
But yeah, it's not like a constant.
Which ones?
You know, I just bought a 3-pound box of Kayam hot dogs. Kayam? It's delicious. It's like a tubular bologna. It was fabulous.
So could you explain this brouhaha in the Olympics with the pizza, where apparently the Italian team and an Asian team really came to blows because the Asians put pineapple on the pizza, and the Italians felt that was like, a crisis.
I didn't know that. Did you know that?
I didn't know that either.
Did you, Francis?
No, but I want to hear more.
Really?
Like, what athletes were they? Was it like the archers of China, and you know the skeet shooters of Italy, and there was a skirmish? I will say this, and this is not my research, but this is something I learned from someone who looked into this. Everything you know about pizza is wrong. Pizza, on a true level, this is not like all the way back in history, but pizza is more American than it is Italian. Because what happened was, yes, pizza was invented in Italy, when they first discovered wheat or whatever, but pizza was really a southern Italian food. It was from Naples, and pretty much only in Naples, but so much of the Italian diaspora that came to the United States was Neapolitan and southern. And here, pizza became a street food. Pizza became super popular. Pizza became the ubiquitous food that it is now. And then after World War II, pizza essentially was reintroduced into the rest of Italy via its popularization in America. So when Italians want to come at you with the rules of pizza, you tell them that's not how we do in Brooklyn, baby. That said, I also like pineapple on pizza. But maybe it's because I'm Asian. Hot dog, I mean, I would do it. here would not eat a slice of pizza with pineapple and hot dogs on it.
Sounds good.
Would not.
No.
Only a small number of hands going.
What do you like usually on your pizza? I mean, on your hot dog?
On my hot dog? The beauty of the hot dog is that it is a blank canvas but with flavor. So you can truly put anything on a hot dog and it's gonna be good.
Pineapple might be good.
Pineapple's good. I had kimchi and mayonnaise the other day. It was great. I went back for seconds and thirds. The Mexican hot dog, the Sonoran dog, where they actually wrap a slice of bacon around the hot dog and then griddle that. And there's like mayonnaise and hot peppers and...
I'm sorry, mayonnaise on hot dogs just sounds disgusting.
Yeah, you're probably like a no mayo with pastrami person too. I understand, but I don't believe.
Maybe we're done.
I want to look into the story though. That sounds great. I love an Olympic Village drama.
We'll learn.
Are we done? Maybe we're done.